This is going to be my most brutal opinion of them. I want to talk to you about the pros and cons of having sheep slats, specifically wooden slats, in our lambing shed. Now, I'm coming at this from a lambing perspective. This is all my opinion from having used these slats for the past 3 years. So I'm going to start off with the cons, because who wants to hear bad news last? Number one, not having the slats stocked to the right amount for the size of the area that's slatted. It means that they aren't able to keep the slats clean due to not enough traffic walking on the slats all the time and pushing the dung down through. Number two, if a ewe has foot rot or scald, she tends to spread it to the rest. Whatever it is about the wooden slats, they seem to lock in the bacteria. It doesn't really go away until they're washed afterwards. Keeping on the topic of sore feet, number three, sheep with sore feet tend to find the slats very difficult to stand on, very difficult to walk in. So I do find that once the sheep are at a stage where they're hobbling around, you have to put them in a pen. Number four, depending on the height that you have the slats off the ground, they can get full in certain areas. What I mean by that is if the animal is standing in a certain area and you're feeding them constantly in the one place, eventually that area will get blocked. It means that it's wet all the time, it's dirty all the time. Number five, when the slats are slippy, the sheep do tend to run on them and they tend to slip. It means that the sheep's feet can tend to get caught. Their feet obviously are split like this. It can get caught and pull on one and it ends up hurting them. Number six, unless you have a way of lifting them, they're very difficult to move by themselves as they're very heavy. I'm sure I don't need to explain that, but just for people that are thinking about building them themselves, if you don't have a way of moving them, I do find that it's incredibly difficult to get them maneuvered into where you want them. We're very lucky here, we have a loader, we can lift them in one go. If you watch the other videos, you'll see they just lift straight out and away. Yeah, that's something to consider if you're thinking about building slats. Definitely have a way of lifting them out again. Number seven, lamb's legs, depending on the size of the lamb, can go down through the slats. The gap to each slat is around 15 millimeters, but it's still big enough for a lamb's leg to go down through, especially when they're newly lambed. They're very slippy, they just go straight down through it. It's quite dangerous for the lambs. I would not recommend lambing on slats, but I would recommend having sheep that are to lamb on slats. Once the lamb has gotten to about a week old, you don't need to worry about that anymore. Number eight, I think. If you're feeding silage on slats, I do recommend that you use only at least double chopped silage, this length and no longer. If they get it any longer than that, the sheep do tend to pull the silage in, and it means that it gets wrapped up in the slats. I wouldn't recommend feeding them long stemmed haylage or silage. Now we're going to move on to the pros, although there aren't as many as the cons, but for us, they're perfect. Number one, no bedding, no straw, no sawdust. You do not need anything on the slats. There's no need for any bedding. Two, that means no scraping out. There's no need to take your animals out of the shed or out of the pen just to clean the area. They get to stay in this area at all times, which is just brilliant, especially for people with hill sheep. They're crazy, they jump over the top of each other. It means that you don't need to go near them at all. Number three, the area will stay relatively clean. As I said before in the cons, if you don't have the area stocked right, they will dirty the area, but if you have it stocked right, you don't need to worry about it getting dirty. There's enough traffic on the slats to keep the dung going down at all times, so it means that the slats are usually relatively clean. Number four, their feet will stay clean and dry. Usually when you have sheep with the likes of scald or foot rot and they're standing in a wet bedding that's warm, it's full of bacteria, it means that they're not getting the chance to heal the way they can in the likes of the slats where there's air running through underneath them all the time. Their feet are usually dry and they never get too warm, so the bacteria doesn't get a chance to grow. Now again, this is all based on my own opinion and my experience with this shed. If you haven't already watched the video of me explaining the whole thing, I would recommend it. It's one of my pinned videos. You'll be able to see it at the very top of my page. This was an existing shed, so obviously if you're there and you're thinking of building a new shed, this might not be for you. That's fine. This is just something that has worked for us. This is just a shed that we renovated, and then with having the slats and no tank, it means that we're able to take away the slats and store machinery or put other animals in here. If you had a tank, this would only be for sheep, and I don't think that would be very beneficial for us at all. This shed is 3 bays long, which is around 47 feet. I'd say about over 2/3 of this shed is taken up by the slats. The rest is the cubicles, which is now the pens. This shed is well able to accommodate over 60 ewes. I would recommend that if anyone is thinking of doing something like this, make sure you take into account of how well you're going to have it stocked. If you think you're only going to have maybe 5 or 6 sheep on an area this big for a long length of time, you should expect the slats to be very dirty. If you have a lot of sheep run on them, you should expect the slats to be relatively clean. Our sheep are only on these slats for up to 3 months maximum. After that, the only time the sheep be in here is if they're being worked with, say dosed, clipped, whatever. That's the only other time we have sheep in here. So the slats do tend to stay clean. I still believe, even with all the cons, that it's a perfect system for us. Because this was a shed that we were able to renovate, we've been able to keep more sheep now lambing. Before that, we didn't have the area to lamb as many sheep as we were able to. Now we can lamb up to 120 ewes easily, which is just perfect for us. Usually the way we do it is we'll split them in a bigger batch and a smaller batch, and we'll put the ram out with the first batch about a month earlier to the next batch. So you have sheep coming in, you have them all lambed by the time the next batch has to come in. There's no need to clean out slats in between that time. If you're looking at it and you're thinking this isn't for me, that's fine. There's also plastic slat options. I find that they're a lot more expensive than the wooden slats. We were in a very lucky situation that we found someone that was willing to cut the slats for us. It ended up just not expensive at all, well worth our time doing. But yeah, if you have a shed similar to this, I highly recommend putting in sheep slats. They have been hugely beneficial for us and have saved us a lot of money in the long run. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any more questions, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.